Hi, and welcome back to the panel room. I'm your host, Jim Nettles, and tonight the devil has made me do it. They've put me in the seat once again, and we're here to talk about what motivates our monsters, our antagonists, our villains. Before we go too far down into those depths, though, let's see who all decided to join us into this oubliette. Elizabeth, you are up first.
Hello, my name is Elizabeth Davis. I am one half of Dead Fish Books, and my starring achievement in the role of writing monsters with motivation was the time I accidentally wrote a sympathetic cannibalistic monster.
Kiernan, how about you?
Hi, I'm Kiernan Kelly. I write lots of things. I write GLBT romance. I write YA. I also write horror, which seems like an odd combination when you think about it. And that's me in a nutshell.
Melody?
Hello, I'm Melody Johnson. I write paranormal and sci-fi romance. In my paranormal romance, I write my Nightblood series, and for sci-fi romance, I write my Love Beyond series, both of which have different forms of monsters to battle.
Jenny?
Hi, I'm Gini Koch. I write the Alien Catherine Kitty Cat series for Doll Books. I also write under a variety of other pen names and in all lengths and genres, including horror and paranormal, and there are lots of monsters in those, and also lots of different monsters in my Alien series. Monsters be good.
Violet?
I'm Violette Meier. I write sci-fi, fantasy, and mostly paranormal. I love the monsters of unconventional mythology and legends.
And Jay?
Hello, I'm Jay Smith. I'm a writer, podcaster, and audio dramatist. Most of my time has been spent writing a zombie horror series, which puts the focus of the monsters on the humans.
So I want to sort of start talking about the idea of a monster, right? Because the monster, it really is, it goes beyond the antagonist. A lot of the time we look at whoever the villain or the antagonist it is, they're operating from that position of being the hero of their own story. But when we really start talking about really the monsters, we go from the truly just simply predatory, they do what they do, and they do it by instinct. Others do it by intent, for pleasure of the act, all sorts of things. We look at the old classic Universal, movie monsters. We have vampires, mummies. We have the creature from the Black Lagoon who was just motivated by a little bit of love. I want to kind of start with that idea of what is your favorite kind of a monster and what is it about their motivations that makes you kind of love them? So, Elizabeth, you're up first.
My favorite type of a monster is one that's trying to balance inhuman appetites with pursuing human ambition, such as, oh no, I must eat the flesh of humans. I also really want to check out this Hollywood. It looks fascinating. How do I balance my need to eat humans with trying to be a tourist in Hollywood? Because it gives us audience interesting point to connect with the monster there, and that adds a bit of humanity that I think makes the horror stand out more.
What about you, Kiernan?
I absolutely love creatures. I love my creature features. But I also enjoy creatures who are sentient. I think that puts a deeper spin on things, and it makes it more interesting when the creature is a thinking and feeling creature, not just a mindless set of teeth. For example, real quick, Frankenstein's monster was a monster. He was a creature. He was put together from different pieces, but he also had motivation. He had a reason why he was doing what he was doing. He was getting frustrated. He was angry. He was experiencing human emotions, and that's the part that I like.
Everything would be fine if he just simply had a father figure who stayed around.
So how about you, Melody? What's your favorite? What's your driver in your monsters?
I love a good monster that, from his point of view, you could almost be rooting for him. or her. That, whether it's, steeped in revenge or, wanting to, that whole take over the world mentality. But when you're in that person's point of view and all the deep, dark wounds that they've suffered or everything that has, shaped them as a person, or shaped them as a monster, that you could, if only they weren't killing people, and you could be like, yes, go for it.
Jenny, how about you?
I'm kind of with Melody, honestly, on that. I mean, I like all the monsters. I use all the monsters, but I think they're more fun and interesting if you can somewhat three-dimensionalize them, so they are someone that if you or your protagonist gets to realize, kind of like in Blade Runner, the replicants are not evil, horrible creatures. They're trying to survive. And so forth. That makes them much more sympathetic and three-dimensional and very easy to see there, but for, the grace of luck, go I. So I'm with Melody. I like him when there's just that part of you. If you just didn't do this one thing, we'd be behind you 100%.
Violet?
I too like the suffering monster. I like the ones that, they're a thinking being with a soul, that they're just not this ravenous, rabid animal going around ripping people up, but it has a rhyme and a reason for the thing it does. So those are the monsters that I like.
All right, Jay.
I like the corrupted hero type. I like learning about a character who had noble ambitions and for whatever reason is corrupted. And they're so obsessed with obtaining their perhaps noble goal that they lose sight of how they get there, and they start hurting people and corrupting themselves more and more until somebody has to intervene and fix them or make them realize, or whether or not they succeed or not is part of the tension in the story that I enjoy most.
So looking and diving just maybe a little bit deeper into this, we talk about the old goal, conflict, motivation, right? It's the old iron triangle. It's really all about the why, because a lot of the time it is the why of the hero. It's the why of the villain. It's the why of the monster, right? It is. And I think we all kind of have that same thing of, we want something that it knows what it's doing. When we talk about something like going back to the Predator, these are creatures that were engineered for a specific purpose, and that purpose was to basically turn everyone into a sushi bar, right? But I think that often what we like to see is that balance, that conflict of the humanity and the monster, right? Whether it's Frankenstein's monster being made from all those parts and that conflict, or kind of that classic balance in the vampire that's trying to maintain some shred of humanity while also recognizing that they're no longer human. They're now that beast that needs to feed. And all the different ways that we have seen that portrayed, in film and TV and in fiction, and looking at that balance. So Kiernan, is there a particular flavor of that you like to give it to? And is there a particular example that really speaks to you more?
I wasn't prepared to go next, but I'm really not sure, to tell you the truth. I like all creatures that have, when it comes to saying that a creature is just doing what a creature is created to do, what his motivation is, just what his animalistic nature is. We all do that. I mean, even the human animal, we need to feed. Even those of us who are vegetarian or vegan need to feed. We're feeding off something other than ourselves. And I think a lot, especially in the creature features that I like, they're also just doing what they do. So how can you find them? You can't find them to be evil per se. So the devil doesn't make them do it. It's just that they're doing what they do. On the flip side, when you've got something like a vampire or a werewolf, they are still doing what they are created to do, but not necessarily what they were born to do. Does that make sense? at all, or am I just rambling at this point?
Well, and to me, one of the things that I like is, again, if I look at, let's just take a vampire, for example. If we look at, some of the vampires from Buffy, right? Go back in the good old days, you see that internal struggle with Angel. You look at the redemption arc you have with Spike. Or if we look at Lestat, from Interview with a Vampire and whatnot, you see that balance of what makes me now the new me, and that identity, right? And it's kind of that idea of what are those motivations that really drive us and that attract us and make us want to connect really to, in some of these cases, not necessarily the villain, but somebody who is motivated in doing things that we would otherwise go and say, oh yeah, I'd love to be around that person. Or other times it's purely the monster that we look at, we can't connect to, and that purest sense of fear, horror, and revulsion, right? We can go both ways. So I don't know, Melody, what about you? What is there a particular example you can think of that you really like, whether you connect with it or it's one you look at and you say, I absolutely can't connect with it, but that's part of the reason for my love and the passion for that?
I think one of my favorites is Tui from Little Shop of Horrors. He's the alien that gets beamed down to the little plant shop, and he starts out as such a cute little plant, and that, oh, I just want one little drop of blood. Let me grow. That's all I need. And then little by little, then he becomes like a cannibalistic. He's actually motivated to like commit murder and like forcing the hero to commit murder for him, as like his caretaker. And so even though, sometimes it's nice to have a redemption arc, but other times it's nice to see the evil being evil and having, just going for it. And one of my stories for Sight Beyond the Sun, my newest one, has a little bit of that plant-eating human-esque to it. So I really enjoy that.
Jenny?
Okay, I have to say this, and I'm so embarrassed. The author's first name is Courtney, and I cannot remember her last name. I was just on a panel with her last weekend at LibertyCon. But she said something just sort of as a toss aside line. I'm like, that is accurate. Vampires are serial killers. They just do it with style. Okay, so, they're great in various ways, but still, ultimately, they're just a smarter shark. That's me. That's not her. This one's me. They're a smarter shark. I don't mind the smarter sharks, but I think the monsters I like best are doing it all for a reason. The Brendan Fraser mummy movies, they're scary. The Mummy is a terrifying monster, but he is doing it all for love. That, in the spoiler, these movies have been out for like decades, so sorry if this is a spoiler alert for something. But in the second movie, when he finally gets his love back and she runs away and he watches Evie risk everything to save Rick, that you see he's practically like, peace be with you guys. You know what? Peace. I was wrong. All blessings, God, love, all love. I'm going to go now, right? You see it in his face because his love has betrayed him and Rick's love has not. O'Connell's love has not betrayed him. And I like those. I like where the monster is monstrous, but for all those right reasons. I find those very attractive versus the Freddy or the Jason, 50,000 iterations of having sex is wrong. I'm tired of that. Okay. It's like your parents are mean to me, so I'm going to kill everybody else is sort of like, yeah, but those kids didn't do anything wrong, right? So I just, the slasher serial killers just do nothing for me. And it's like, they don't have the terror of Jack the Ripper and they just have an endless sense of no style whatsoever. I want the style.
Violet?
favorite kind of monster are monsters like the boo hag, like in the South Carolina and South Georgia, because they are shapes shifting, skin snatching, witty women who are doing what they have to do to survive. And they're only considered a monster to the ones who the skins they're stealing, but not to themselves, I'm sure. So it's like for a reason. My least favorite monsters, I've always hated zombies. I think they are a pointless brood. I don't understand the concept of it. I hate a zombie. I can't do it. It's no reason for them to exist and be liked. They're too easy to kill.
Unless you put enough of them together.
Yes, that is true.
Jay?
Well, I got to push back a little bit about that as a zombie writer. I always thought that the zombies were just a catalyst, and that they were a contagion that make men into monsters. Because in all the great zombie stories, it's never really the zombies that's the monster. It's the bad people who emerge in a crisis, who are the true, vile creatures that come out of it. And then that actually segues into my personal favorite, Negan from The Walking Dead. I was thinking about this after I just watched the pilot of the new series with Negan and Maggie in it, and falling asleep every 5 minutes. But I remember reading Negan in Robert Kirkman's book and thinking, this is the perfect irredeemable monster that from the hero's perspective, there is nothing good about this guy. He is a force of nature that has a mouth on him, and he just straight up murders people to make a point. But if you look at it from the inverse, this is a man who's protecting people by any means necessary. He's essentially a modern cult leader. So he's got his own version of nobility in his own head. Sure, he's got a harem, and yeah, sure, he melts people's faces for disagreeing with him, but he's doing that for the greater good because of the 100 people who rely on him every day to stay alive. But it's written with such a great balance that you can't look at this character after smashing Glenn's head in and think this is a guy who has any rational motivation. It's not until Kirkman goes back and reveals Negan's origin story in the special issues that you kind of start to empathize with him. You start to understand the man who had to become a monster in order to protect himself and people he loved. And then eventually he found himself in this role where he just could not go back again. I think that's my favorite type of villain. One who either he just kind of stumbles into the fact and doesn't realize until it's too late. Am I the bad guy in this movie? And I think their show took it way too far and neutered Negan because he was such a fan favorite that I look at him now and I don't recognize that character that we were introduced in. So there's a perfect fulcrum for that character that I think they went over the line with in the show, but I think it represents that alternative view towards zombies as the monster. The zombies made the monster out of Negan, which in turn made one of the greatest villains, I think, in fiction.
Elizabeth?
So, just as you defend zombies, I'm going to defend slasher villains here for a moment. At least the ones that lived on beyond their initial movies, because there are some examples we could talk about with Halloween or Nightmare on Elm Street, in which the first movie does stand up pretty well. Friday the 13th first outing was a bit of a rough, and that's true for a lot of slasher villains when it comes to, and this is leading somewhere, I promise, when it comes to building them up as monsters. And what I was going to say, a monster that we have not talked about here, because we've gone to the suffering, very sympathetic monster to totally monstrous, is the monster that knows that they are a monster and is having a lot of fun with it. They're always a blast to see on screen and in media. And I always like seeing more of them. And I think a good example would be Dream Warriors, Freddy Krueger, or Jason of Jason X, when there's enough personality built in that the monster is also giving off a performance along with these kills. And you can see a lot of human elements of pride, creativity, stuff like that we normally value kind of working to create a man. I would hate to be anywhere near this person in real life, but they are entertaining to see on a screen, and it is a bit harder to do in book form, but I've seen people do it. Or a book to do a entertaining monster. A monster that takes pride in their monsterhood, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Without becoming utterly inhuman.
They own their monsterhood. They're well adjusted into it.
Yeah.
Kind of like me. So, kind of leading into the next question, and so Melody, you're going to get this one. You know, one of my favorites is always the trickster. You know, the Fae, Loki, things like this, where the question is always, you know, really about motivation. Because, you know, having written a lot of stuff about Fae and Fae mythology and playing with it, that idea of having something that is not human motivation, but something that we can see glimmers of motivation in it. You know, are there particular ideas of, say, the tricksters, you know, those that just sort of love to play with humanity? They, you know, they want to go play with their food. You know, are there aspects to that you like, and what are the things that you do and don't like in terms of that being able to play with something that is not human? You know, it's not human. It's never been human, but it's something we deal with in that given universe or that given world.
I think one of my favorite authors, Karen Marie Moning, she has her Fever series that has Fae in it, and one of my favorite aspects of that is the main character in that is very human. She is a sister who goes to a whole nother country to try and solve her sister's murder and gets embroiled in this world that she never knew existed with the Fae. And that dichotomy of her being so innocent, not having known that the Fae existed. Also, she's kind of like in the beginning, very stereotypical, kind of like the young sister, the blonde sister, very innocent. And then diving into this world where the Fae, like you said, see her kind of like as a plaything, but also because they're so worldly, they're so old, they know how it's all going to turn out. And so having someone so human to battle something so larger than life is kind of fun. It kind of gives you hope in your smaller battles day to day that, you know, if this character can go up against this god or what thinks, you know, is like a god image, because they're so much older and smarter, that you can make it through your life.
Jenny?
This is Dash, by the way, who mommy was gone. She is not happy that I have not been giving him the attention since this started. I love me my trickster god, including Coyote, who could take Dash's form in a minute and possibly already has. Coyote's the Native American trickster god, and I love Coyote. Coyote does things because Coyote wants to do them, but he has to answer to the higher god, to his father, Usan, and others. So I love Coyote because he is a lot like Loki. I like the tricksters because they're usually sarcastic jerks, but they have a point. They have a point of view, and sometimes it's to make fun of and play with humans. But they are just as likely to help a human if it strikes their fancy. So I think they're very fun. They're very fun to write. They're fun to watch because you really, from moment to moment, do not know what they're going to do. And I enjoy that unpredictability, especially in the safety of a story or a movie.
Violet?
Nazi the spider, who a lot of people consider the trickster. And although people can get in a lot of trouble, it's always a point to it all. And I think these deities are there to ruffle your feathers, but it's also to make you think and to see that it's always a greater cause for everything that happens. So I do appreciate the trickster.
Jay?
I was never a fan growing up. I always hated the episodes of the cartoons with Super Friends, in particular with Mr. Mixelplick or Mixelpicklick or Batmite, and I never got into it. But then a writer friend of mine said that you like the Q episodes on Star Trek. It's the same thing, same gimmick. Star Trek's been doing that since Trelane in the original series. But really, it's not that the trickster in modern fiction is really the writer's room. It's a bunch of guys who need a bunch of fresh ideas, and they say, "What if we can just throw the genre out?" And Q shows up. Physics be damned. We're going to just shoot the spaceship on the other side of the galaxy. We don't need any rules. Whatever. It's the same thing with imps. It's like let's come up with something so absurd and preposterous that only a supernatural entity can make it make sense in the structure of your story. From that perspective, yeah, that could be a lot of fun. I am the imp. I am the trickster. I am Hanuman, the monkey god. I can come back and do whatever the hell I want, and the editor can go get stuffed because it makes sense from a literary perspective if I have that literary device at my disposal. So I think it's a gateway if you have a good what if question in your story that needs some flexibility within your genre to try and explore and answer. But yeah, I mean, if the story is good, I like it. From a mythological perspective, it's great storytelling to explain how the real world works, allegedly. And then they're usually the most fun stories in mythology when the gods come down and start messing with people. They don't have enough stuff to do on their plate that they can come down and do that stuff. But they never really reveal themselves. And it's kind of a writer's conceit to say, I don't have to understand. You don't have to understand the motivation of this god now. Because he's a god, and it's way above your head. So just go with it. That's usually pretty fun from a writer's and a reader's perspective. Again, if it's done well.
Elizabeth?
Oh, I was going to say I was raised on stories of Raven, from the Pacific Northwest. But I was sitting here thinking about the fact that often the trickster gods in modern fiction get depicted as being a lot more human and as the underdog. And also, when we were talking about inhuman motivations, I was thinking, oh, Faye, they're really into games and all this stuff. Now, excuse me, as I have to sit here and think about the fact I need to make 4 imaginary traps to trap imaginary people in this game of Dungeons and Dragons on Friday. It's not like humans aren't obsessed with games at all whatsoever as well. And I think that's actually a good idea for when trying to make an inhuman motivation for your trickster is to take that very human idea of boredom or fascination with games, puzzles, or I wonder what happens if I do this. And just make that the character's motivation. I mean, think if you play open world games and you're like, I wonder what happens if I was to mess with the NPCs in this way. Doesn't that make you the trickster god who does terrible things for unknowable reasons?
So, Kiernan, before I get called out anymore, how about you?
Well, I'm going to take a leap, and I'm going to say that I think one of the most cruel trickster villains that I can think of is actually Jigsaw from the Saw films. I consider him a trickster because while he operated under his own motivations, nobody else understood them. The people that were going through his traps didn't understand why he was doing what he was doing to them. So I consider that to be a trickster. But he was not the joyful trickster that Coyote is. He was just cruel and mean and a real true monster.
Well, I think that kind of goes and segues to a place that we've already touched on a little bit, which is one of those things that you guys don't necessarily care for, which is the good, more traditional slasher monster, right? We're looking at the Freddys of the world. We're looking at the Jasons, or if we're even looking at some of the older ones. When we talk about them, they're largely morality tales. And Jenny, like you were saying, there's aspects of these were like, okay, yeah, we've run that one to death. We know that spiel. But I think understanding and looking at that as a motivation, right? Those kind of morality tales and things that we pull into often. So if we look at those, and if we look at our villains, if we look at our monsters and what drives them, how do you see often the morality tale? Because even in all of these, there's always an aspect to that which it is reflecting something. So are there ones that you still like to see that reflection in the morality tale? And while I have a good solid guess on what this is going to be, what's also one that you look at and you go, I just never need to see that again. I don't need to see it. I've seen it. It's done. It's done. It's done.
Is it me? Am I going then?
It's you. It's all you. It's center square. All that.
I'm just going to channel Paul Lind. I'd rather do that. I hate slasher flicks. Okay, I've never liked them. So I mean, I know people love them. Okay, and I don't want to take that away from people. Just because I don't like it doesn't mean it shouldn't exist. But I don't care for them at all. I think they're very repetitive. I think they're stupid. I really do. I think they're vicious. Kiernan's right. Jigsaw is vicious. I agree. He's a trickster, and he is vicious and nasty. There's nothing ever good in any of those. There's no redeemable quality in them, and I don't like that. I like something where there's a shot that maybe this character could be redeemed, because then it makes it even harder for the hero or heroes to do the final solution if they're good, because maybe we could redeem him. Maybe we could save him. That's actually, to me, is Batman's whole shtick. That's why Arkham's always full, because Batman is consistently going, there's that maybe I don't want to kill him because, maybe they can be reformed. Never more true than with Two-Face, who is one of his best friends before he's turned. Batman does not kill. Batman does not want to kill because he is looking for redemption. And I would much prefer that. It makes your hero more complex because they can't just shoot something. Like Violet said, what's the point of a zombie? You're just going to shoot him in the head. I agree with Jay. They're there to create the human monster, or put the humans into the horrible situations where they either become good or evil. But they're not. I prefer a monster or a bad guy that could have a redeemable quality. I may be a vampire, but I won't let anybody ever abandon a puppy or a kitten, right? No, somebody who I only eat people who abuse animals, right? And suddenly he's a hero. So I prefer that. I like them more three-dimensional, and I'm not saying they're not out there, but I've never felt any of the slasher flicks where the villains are three-dimensional. I've always felt they're just two dimensions, and both of those dimensions are evil.
Violent?
For the most part, I agree with that, but it's two slasher series that I do find redeemable. Like Dexter, he's a serial killer that kills serial killers. So I like the way they set up his character as someone who is traumatized. He's a sociopath. He tries his best to blend in with other people, but he has a desire he can't control, so he uses it for the good. So he say, I'm a serial killer. I'll kill other people who are just like me. So in some way, he's trying to be protective. And when I think of like natural born killers, they're born out of trauma and just dysfunction. So they basically have a mental break and go on a psychotic killing spree. And they were monsters who were created by terrible parents in society and all of those things. So to me, I can understand that better. I hate things but for the most part, I agree. I don't like killing for the sake of killing. Like I saw Hostel and the lady is like taking a bath in blood and just ridiculousness. I think it's demonic and sick, and I wouldn't even want to live next door to that writer because that's disturbing.
Exactly. I'm with you. Though I don't think either one that you mentioned fall under my version of a slasher flick. Those are serial killers that I'm with you. I think they're interesting because there's always something that turned them, right? But the slashers, yeah, I'm with you on both. Yeah.
Jay?
Piggybacking on both Ginny and Violette, there are two different types of film. There's the spectacle slasher, which is basically an extension of our old folklore cautionary tales that go back to the premise of Friday the 13th. If you have drugs, if you have sex out of wedlock, something's going to kill you. Then there's nothing you can do about it. So don't do it. You know, it's the same foundation in all religions and all cultures. There's always that myth. It's you can't stop it. It's inevitable. And that's boring. After the first story, Friday the 13th just kind of petered out. There's no meeting of the characters to say, how do we stop this threat? It's always just a setup for the next kill, which was what was at the core of what made Scream a brilliant film, was that it turned that genre around and said, let's put the focus on these characters, and they're going to try and do something about this. We're going to flesh out the characters so that they're three-dimensional. They're not just having sex and having drugs, etc. When you get into something like Dexter, that becomes more of a drama. And it's not a show unless you love those characters, unless you're invested in either their victory or their defeat. So it's like night and day. I never liked the cautionary tales because they were really like chick tracts you found in the men's room. They were just these overblown morality stories that say, if you do X, you're going to burn. That's, from a storyteller's perspective, that's really just not interesting. But if you get a couple of characters in there, you throw them in there, and you say, I can kill Jason Voorhees this time. Here's my plan. And your interest as a viewer isn't the next kill, but is this plan going to work? That's how some of the Friday the 13th sequels kind of worked, when they started to realize that this formula is not working unless we actually have a chance to kill Jason. So yeah, I think when we ask the question, if we're talking strictly about folklore and morality tales, there's got to be a story in there. Otherwise, it's just a Bible reading.
Elizabeth?
I will fight. Before we go on to the actual question, I will fight to the death that A New Nightmare deserves as much credit for deconstruction the slasher as the Scream franchise. The New Nightmare from Friday the 13th series, which is a meta horror movie in which the actors themselves are being haunted by Freddy. So cautionary tales. I actually think there's more to this wellspring than a lot of people give credit to when you initially look at it. The trick is to look at not do the tried and true morals. Don't go out by yourself after dark. Don't have sex or stuff like that. Save it for something that people really get angry about, like tailgaters. And you still can do a sympathetic villain with a cautionary story. Or monster, I should say. This is a short story I wrote that actually somebody go, I really love this. And put in the anthology, and I had to write this whole thing of, this is actually weirdly a cautionary tale horror story. I know we don't print these anymore, but here we are. In which a strip club owner eats the heart of someone who was stalking one of her girls. And so we do all from her perspective, so we see her protectiveness and motheriness towards the girls she's carrying this out. And so you get both the sympathetic three-dimensional slasher along with the cautionary tale element, which is don't stalk people, especially if they work at strip clubs run by nigh immortal priestesses of Ishtar. But that's what I'd say is probably something, if you really want to do a cautionary tale, you look at how you can make the slasher monster sympathetic. Even if it was just, man, if I have yet another tailgater, I swear.
Kiernan, how about you?
Well, I'm also not a fan of slasher films except for two. There's only two that I really enjoy. The first one actually is the first Nightmare on Elm Street with the first couple. And the reason is because Robert Englund really plays him with a sense of humor. It may be over the top. It may be, a little too far gone, but it's still a sense of humor. And I enjoy that. I enjoy the monster who's kind of almost laughing at himself. And the second one is John Carpenter's Halloween. I think that's a classic movie. I think it was very little blood was shown. It was all suspense and thriller. So those are my two exceptions. Other than that, I really don't care to watch slasher films. I'm not a big fan.
Melody?
I wouldn't say I would stricken any of them off the market. I enjoy I enjoy the mindless slasher film as much as I enjoy the psychological thriller. I would say my go-to is often ones that have to do with nature. So like Jaws, man battling shark, or Arachnophobia, man battling spiders, viruses for zombies. I love that aspect of that the motivation is like something so natural that it's their instinct that the hero's battle is against something that is almost like higher than him or her, because it's the way that perhaps it's supposed to be. Sharks are supposed to feed, so how could you possibly fight that? So I enjoy a good woman versus nature.
So Violet, when we look at kind of the collective, and we're always wanting to play that antagonist. I mean, we all know the favorite actors that they always portray a great villain, right? We always love to see that monster. And the reason often is because we can see even the simplest of motivations. We can see that simplest edge or that more complex development of them in the characters that they play. Now, one of the things that we often like to see and play with is, are they responsible for their actions? When we look at, especially 70s, 80s, we had a lot of movies that were psychological, thrillers of, is the person possessed? Are they under an undue influence? Or are they just simply mad, right? We've seen the mental health questions that come up in sometimes in the monsters, in the actions that get taken. When you look at some of those stories, the question of, is it the devil bringing his due? Has a deal really been cut? Even if we look at something like Fight Club, right? There's all the stories of how much of this is really in his head. Is it 2 characters? Is it 3? Is it 4? How much of this is in the real world versus what's in his head? Are there stories like that for you? Is there a particular case as one where you're looking and you're asking the question, am I looking at somebody that is being touched by an outside influence, or is it all inside of them?
I like the character Lucifer in the show Lucifer. And it begs for me, is it your responsibility for the things that you do just because of who you are? It's this battle of nature that all of us have. Like, are we created by our parents and our circumstances and our trauma? So it's a funny line. It's like, you don't want to say, well, he's a fallen angel. He rebelled. He did this stuff. So he's free to do all of these crazy things. So it's a fine line between consequences and responsibility, accountability. And it's all about perspective. About, like, I love possession films and things like that, where people are taking out of their control. But then it's just a complicated thing about how you view the world. Do you always have a choice? Was it a choice that you made when you look at The Exorcist, was it the choice to bring the little totem home that possessed the little kid? So it's like, is it a choice in there? So did you really have responsibility for it? It's just a hard question. I think it's about your perspective and how you view things. Do you think things happen by happenstance and just stuff happens and you can just go wacko and slash everybody up? Or is it a buildup of something happened when someone stepped on my foot in 5th grade and I'm not okay with it and I'm taking it out on everybody? I don't know.
What about you, Jay?
Possession and mind control and devices that remove the agency from villains that doesn't tend to interest me as much as characters who are forced to go through a series of difficult choices and find themselves having to make things at the expense of who we see as the heroes of a story. So they may not, as you said, Jim, they may not see themselves as the villain. They're simply going through a process that requires that they have to make sacrifices, or they have to make decisions for the greater good, maybe not having the perspective of what that true greater good is. When you're in the mind of the villain, or even if they see themselves as an antagonist to the hero, seeing that process, why am I making these choices? Is it for my own personal gain? Am I doing this for others? Am I making myself the martyr? Those are the kind of questions in a villain that I like to get inside their head and try and understand, so that they can have those empathetic traits that I hope for their redemption. I hope that maybe there's some good could come out of that conflict. But even if they end up being complete dirtbags, that decision-making tree ends up being a rewarding ride when they finally get their comeuppance. So I think agency, is the key to that, to establishing a memorable and interesting character. Whereas in some cases where you get this, is he mentally ill? The way Hollywood and literature has handled mental illness through the decades and generations has been questionable at best. And in a lot of cases, possession is just another word for mental illness, but given a sheath of religion on top of it. So that to me absolves people of any responsibility for any of their villainy, because you're basically saying he's a villain, but he's not really the villain, is he? So when I look at that kind of stuff, it then becomes more about a struggle against nature. The hero's trying to triumph over something that has no mind or no agency or animus, and it's not really the same kind of story, if that makes sense.
What about you, Elizabeth?
Well, I'm going to say this is going to depend a lot on the monster you want to write. I, for one, was about to say I like possession stories, but more of when it's a buddy cop duo, when you still have some agency in the situation. Whether you play it more comedically, as I said, there are more horrors, losing control of your body, if you don't just decide to take off the hand and attach a chainsaw right away. But when it comes to psychological stuff, this is going to really depend on how much of a human your monster is. I mean, you probably could get an interesting psychological profile on Dracula and why he chooses to do the things he does. But, the creature from the Black Lagoon probably is not quite so psychologically complex. He really just would like a date and has yet to figure out how to swipe on Tinder.
He did it all for love, but he won't do that. So Kiernan.
Well, I think when it comes to looking at a monster who I'm kind of still on, after all these years, I'm still on the fence over whether or not he was acting with agency or not, is Norman Bates. He is obviously crazy, made so by his mom. But does he know what he's doing? Sometimes, dressing up as your mom, I'm still not sure to this day whether he didn't exactly know what he was doing when he dressed up as his mother and slashed Janet Leigh in the shower. I can't make up my mind, because mental illness is such a huge thing to wrap your head around. No pun intended. And I mean, I have mental illness in my family, so I know what it's like. I can, I've dealt with it, maybe not to the extreme of Norman Bates, but I still understand that you can definitely lose agency when you're talking about mental illness, but I'm still not sure if he did. I don't know what your opinion is on that.
So it's one of those things that I always find fascinating because, again, one of my big drivers is why do people do what they do, right? Mm-hmm. It's that question of motivation. And if I look at Norman Bates, and I'm going back to the classic Norman Bates, the original Hitchcock film, when we look, that looks much more like an MPD or something like that, where the question is, how connected are the different personas, and are they or not? Because I don't think we really truly get to see that, but we do get that one glimpse at the end, that closing piece where you see the skull overlaying him, and that really, to me, raises the question of, is he mad or is he possessed by his own mother? Is it he's just got mommy issues, extreme mommy issues, but mommy issues? Is it still just mommy's voice in his head that he's hearing, or is, did some part of her also then just crawl up in there? And that's sort of the thing, to me, is always a fascinating question to play with. Did the devil make them do it? Are they possessed? Are they getting that voice in the ear? And is that voice theirs? Is it just their upbringing, their family, and everything else? Or is there something really much more to that? It's always that little bit of doubt that I think makes it fun in the story, depending on what you're trying to get to and do, is to that question of, are they not? And where are they? So, I mean, to me, that going back to that Norman Bates, that to me is one of those classic examples of, with the imagery, you could explain it and go either way. Melody, how about you?
I would say almost the opposite from Norman Bates maybe would be Hannibal Lecter. Completely aware of himself, completely aware that he is a monster and very intelligent, and manipulating everyone around him, and yet somehow managing to almost be on his side as he's teaming up with Clarice, which is almost like the purest form of monster, to be rooting for that person. So I would say that he would probably be my favorite example of mental illness, kind of like combined with massive intelligence and the evil there that could sprout from someone.
And being a good foodie. I mean, Jenny?
Pairing it with a good wine.
Nice Arva beans.
I have never liked ventriloquist dummies. They've always seemed creepy. And I think it's in the late 70s, Magic, starring Anthony Hopkins, Burgess Meredith, and Anne Margaret, came out. That can still scare me, and it's creepy. And also at the end, so Anthony Hopkins is a ventriloquist, and I think Burgess Meredith is like his manager or something, and Anne Margaret comes into the life, and oh my gosh, he's finally got a chance of this beautiful woman, and the dummy is talking to him, and you do not, for part of it, you're really not sure, is the dummy possessed? Is this a possessed demonic thing that is controlling him, or is it that he's just fractured, right? And the end of the movie, you're pretty convinced he's just fractured, and then you see that, like, the closing scene is the dummy like moving its eyes, and there's no hand up. So that was really creepy. That's similar to the Norman Bates thing. I mean, it came out after Psycho, so we know they were copying, but that's okay. Copy Hitchcock. Really do go ahead. Copy a master if you're going to do it. But that is like, it's one of those, you don't know now. Maybe because you go through a lot of the movie, you really think, at first you're not sure, and then you're pretty darn sure he is just having a psychotic break and is talking to himself. right, and telling himself to do these horrible things, and then at the end, maybe not. So I still don't trust ventriloquist dummies. I don't. The only one I've ever liked was Madam of Whalen and Madam. I was fine with her. Everybody else, no. But Whalen and Madam, I could watch 10 hours of Whalen and Madam, and there's no other a puppet that I could ever spend time on.
How can you not trust Lamb Chop?
Lamb Chop is a sock. Okay. Lamb Chop is not scary. Lamb Chop is sweet and is a sock. Okay, everything else is like has eyes and that can move in a mouth and everything else. Lamb Chop is fine. I will give you Lamb Chop, but all the rest of them are creepy. Howdy Doody, how was that a hit? Anyway.
Jeff Dunham haunts your nightmares, is what you're saying.
Yeah, for me, they are absolutely. They're right there after clowns. Those snakes, clowns, ventriloquism dummies.
So what happens if it's a ventriloquist dummy wearing clown makeup?
And has a pet snake?
And has a pet snake.
No, it is. The ventriloquist dummy is a snake dressed up as a clown.
See, there we go. There it is. I'm not going near it. And if I am, I will find that. That is burn it with fire, right?
So Jay, I'm going to start with you on this one. What is, and I will tell you what mine is. One of my most favorite ones, and you never fully get the view of the motivation other than the fact that they stopped in on Earth for a snack, is Killer Clowns from Outer Space.
Oh my God. I hate you already for bringing that horrible yet accurate movie up.
What was the people at the biker bar expecting when the clowns walked in?
Did you see the teeth on those clowns? Oh my God, that's what they're hiding under those big red lips.
All right, if y'all don't behave, I'm going to bring up Star Wars Life Day, okay? Is there something that you remember that is just that kind of that gleeful horror where the villain is just one you look at and it's like, this is sheer ridiculousness, but there is still also yet that sense of understanding, or that you get this weird sense of true motivation when you look at it, whether it is, whether it's something fun like Killer Clowns, whether it is something a lot, deeper. What's one for you that you look at and you go, you truly understand what's driving them, but it's still so much fun to watch, even though it shouldn't.
I'm going to go back and look at this through a child's eyes when I first saw it. Attack of the Killer Tomatoes.
I love that movie. It's
I can sing the song.
So incredibly bad, but
so funny though.
It's such a bad film, but through a child's eyes, you empathize with the fruit. You empathize with the tomatoes, and you almost hope that they win, because the human character is just so god awful for a variety of reasons. And if you haven't read Jeff Strand's novelization of the movie that just came out, do yourself a favor. It's amazing. But yeah, that would be. It's not profound, but that's the first thing I thought of, especially when you brought up Killer Clowns. It's the same kind of genre. They're just going for the joke, but it comes back with so much more.
Elizabeth?
I was going to go with the Terminator. I understand the motivation perfectly. He's here to ensure that he and his robot brethren do not get wiped out by John Connor's rebellion. But that doesn't make it any less fun and funny watching Arnold Schwarzenegger wander around underreacting to everything and stealing people's clothes.
He was naked. He had to.
That's how you blend in. Kiernan, how about you?
I always and still do root for the ants in them. Still to this day. I didn't see it when it first came out. I saw it in reruns, but I've always felt like they're one of those creatures that we've made the way they are. right? They were just little old ants at one point, and because of our nuclear testing or whatever, or atomic testing at the time, we created these monsters, and yet now we're after them to eliminate them, just for doing what ants do, which is steal sugar and maybe eat the occasional person. So I still root for the ants in them. I just and all those kind, like the Godzilla movies, I root for Godzilla. You know, it's all the creatures that were normal creatures at one point until we screwed it up, and then now we're after them. So I always root for them.
Night of the Lepus.
Night of the Lepus, yes.
Those poor bunnies.
Yes.
They're so adorable.
Awful movie though. Awful.
On their little miniature sets.
Melody?
I've always liked the little gremlins in Gremlins. They're absolutely adorable, and I love even the evil ones. But even when they turn evil, they're still adorable. And you know, there's something about, you know, I guess the underlying, if you can extract something deep and wonderful from Gremlins, you know, going from such a cute little pure good little fluffy pet to, you know, eating after midnight, rah, and then becoming pure evil and chaos. I'd have absolutely no motivation whatsoever except for just pure enjoyment and just wanting to, you know, laugh and, you know, have no limitations on anything. Would probably be the, you know, the most deep you could extract from that. But I always watch that movie, and there's some scary parts in it, but the monsters in that are just so sweet and fun to watch them cause havoc throughout the whole movie.
That describes a lot of cons I've been to. Jenny.
I have, well, first of all, I can toss up literally every Disney villain as having something fun, warm, cuddly, or at least a really great song. So I enjoy the Disney villains. But if we're talking about someone whose motivation we really, really understand, Clockwork Orange, for me, that's monstrous. Okay, not only is our Alec and his friends monstrous to begin with, and then what's done with him is more monstrous. They take away the one thing of beauty that he actually loves, and he's not changed, he's conditioned, and it's not the same thing. So that is not only is he a monster, but what is done to him is monstrous. He does horrible, horrible things, but even that, he doesn't deserve what they do to him. So I think just overall, Clockwork Orange is really, really a powerful thing. It's nonstop monster, even though it's all humans.
Violet?
The things like King Kong and Godzilla, these things are minding their own business in their own home, on their own corner of the earth, and people are over there bothering them. So I feel like they get what they get. Anyone's over there poking and prodding and capturing, and they should get eaten up and burned up and blown up and everything else. So I root for those things that are minding their own business and protecting their own safe haven.
And on that note, I think that's a great place for us to wind this one up. But before we get out of here, let's make sure that everybody knows where to come and find your monstrous works. So, Elizabeth, you're going to be up first.
Hello. You can find me at deadfishbooks.com, where I assume this will be released sometime. You may or may not be able to catch your Kickstarter for Yay, They're Here. First contact stories that go from hilarious to horrifying.
Kiernan?
You can find me at KiernanKelly.com or DakotaChase.com. I also have a Kickstarter for the book behind me, Osmosis. I'm putting that into audio with a little help from my friends. And I'm also on Facebook all the time.
Melody?
You can find me at author.melodyjohnson.com. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and I love talking to people online. So hit me up.
Jenny?
GiniKoch.com. I'm on Facebook way too much, in three or four different ways. So please friend me. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Pinterest, and it still looks like I'm on Instagram. I'm still not doing anything over there. You can find me in person coming up at San Diego Comic Con, Gen Con Indie, Dragon Con, and World Fantasy Con in Kansas City. So if you're going to any of those, please come and say hi. I'm a hugger as a warning, so expect to be hugged.
Violet?
You can find me at violettemeier.com. I'm on everywhere, social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok. My next events I will be at Multiverse, Dragon Con, and Urban Nerd Con in July in Atlanta.
Jay?
You can find most of my stuff at jsmithaudio.com. There are hours of full cast audio drama productions, full cast, full music. A lot of my short stories are read by professional authors, free to download. And if you like those stories, you can buy some of my books, which I hope you do, because I still got a lot of great student loan debt to pay off. So that way every bit helps. I will also be at Fright Reads in October, Tucson, and also at Spooky Empire over Halloween weekend.
And you can find me at jamesbnevels.com, authoressentials.net, authoressentialsworkshops.com, the speculative-fiction-academy.com, creatingprose.com, and of course here at ConTinual. And the devil is going to free me now, and we'll turn y'all loose too. We'll see you again soon.